Welcome to Fridays with a Forester. This is March 28th, 2025. ACORNS, Access, Collection, Organization, and Redistribution of Nuts and Seeds is our topic today. My name is Gary Wyatt, Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota Extension based in our Mankato Regional Office. And Drew Winiger is going to be our Regional Support Staff from Grand Rapids, helping with us today in our webinar. Also, Emily Dombeck, our Forest Program Coordinator, is also managing our webinars as well. ACORNS, Access, Collection, Organization, and Redistribution of Nuts and Seeds. Kara Pollock is our Extension Educator that's going to be talking about this topic today. There's her email, but I'll show that again later on in our presentation at our closing of our webinar today. So the Zoom details for question and answers, we'd like you to enter your questions into the Q&A, please. We will try and put in some chat websites to go to. I think Kira has a class that's coming up that I think Drew has already put in. We'll put that in again for those that are just coming into the webinar. All webinars are recorded, and it's at our Z-link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. Kira, I'm going to stop sharing, and then you can certainly start.
Good morning. I'm Kara Pollock, and I'm excited to talk to you about seeds, everything from ACORNS to Z-links. All right. So I'm likely a new face to most or all of you, so I want to quick introduce myself. I am a regional extension educator focused on forest regeneration. I recently earned my master's in natural resource science and management, where I researched eastern hemlock restoration here in Minnesota. Before that, I was working in restoration as a field technician with the Conservation Corps of Minnesota and Great River Greening. Oh, there's that picture. And then before all of that, I was a tiny tree nerd in Athens, Georgia. This is a picture from one of my first 4-H forestry judging practices, but I also got to know my local woods by tromping around in my grandfather's 2 big muck boots. Basically, I love trees and people and how we all interact in reciprocal relationships. And I'd like to know who's watching. So sound off in the comments and share if you are a landowner, land manager, maybe you're a tree care professional, a researcher, or academic, and hopefully everyone who's here is a tree lover. And tree seed collection is I would say, trending topic at the moment, but it's a little bit new. So also throw out how familiar you are with the concept of tree seed collection from 1, I've heard these words together before, to 5, I am a pro, I am rolling in seed and money. I'll give you a couple seconds to throw that in the chat. We've got a lot of landowners, master gardeners. Well, I'm excited. Folks are excited about oaks. So I'm going to talk really broadly about tree seed collection, though I am happy to talk about what I know about oaks specifically as we get to the end. And if you are interested in taking the course that will go over all of this in much more detail, I'll give you more details on that too. So thank you for answering. I love knowing who's listening. So why is tree seed collection important? Here in Minnesota, we have a need for trees that is currently unmet in terms of the quantity, the species, and where the trees are coming from, which we call provenance, that managers are interested in. So I'm also curious, and you can throw this in the Q&A or you can just think about it. Have any of you tried to source trees from here in Minnesota or maybe a neighboring state and you just can't find what you're looking for? Maybe you had to get it from really far away, or maybe you just had to wait for another year or two to hope that it came in stock. Last fall, Extension and the Urban Forestry Outreach and Research Lab partnered to plant southerly tree species to monitor for adaptability in an urban setting. One of the species we planted was northern pecan trees, and I noticed that some were from Iowa, which makes sense, and then some of them were from Georgia. And a couple years ago, when I sent out a survey looking for eastern hemlock for my master's research, someone reported purchasing seedlings from an Etsy shop out of Georgia, and all, quote, failed to thrive and died. Now, sourcing trees from a little further south of the planting site is a climate adaptive practice. But clearly, here in Minnesota, sourcing trees from Georgia isn't ideal. And I grew up in Athens, as I mentioned, so I can confirm that the climate's a little bit different here. And it's not just that we need to expand production capacity, we just need more seeds. So we can look at the DNR's tree nursery operation, and about a year and a half ago, this NPR article discussed upgrades and expansion plans to increase production from their current levels of about 3 to 4 million seedlings a year to 10 million in the next couple of years and 20 million by 2032. And that's only 7 years away. Now, quintupling production is exciting, and that does mean that we'll have more access to seedlings, but it still won't meet the needs of every landowner or manager. And again, part of this is quantity, but part of it's likely just the species that the DNR is growing. Recently, though, the Seed and Cone webpage updated with this note about increasing the price for black spruce and jack pine cones. This is great news for collectors, especially if anyone's like me and maybe you started collecting some and then you forgot and they're in a bucket in your porch. Congratulations, your equity has just increased. But this incentive is in place because the DNR has no seeds from which to grow these trees. A few professional seed collectors might supply private nurseries, but the DNR's operations rely on a group of volunteers that's small and shrinking. And as a note, depending on your management goals and the life history of a species, natural regeneration is 100% viable as an option for how you get more trees. If you're interested in pulp aspen, you don't need seeds. But generally speaking, planting a tree is faster. It offers more control of who ends up where, or species composition, and it allows land managers to play an active role in climate adaptation. Right now, our climate is heating up faster than trees can run, and if we want resilient forests in the futures, we've got to start working on it now. And you might say, Kira, what do you mean by trees can run? Well, we know that species naturally migrate. Seeds fly or float, hitchhike, and are defecated away from range edges. And if they encounter hospitable conditions, they grow, seed out, and push that edge onward until they hit another barrier. And some species are just better or faster at it than others, which we say means that they have high invadability, and others don't. Now, high invadability may sound a little malicious, but it's morally neutral. This is the same concept as the glaciers receding from Minnesota about 10,000 years ago and species that established here after that. They just invaded, they established, and they're native. As our climate is changing now, areas that weren't hospitable to certain species might become so. The problem is that it's not just expansion, it's that spaces that used to be hospitable may no longer be. Now, if these climate shifts were slow, species could shift slowly. But I think we can agree that the Anthropocene is chugging Red Bulls, and while trees are trying to keep pace, they could use some help. And that's assisted migration. Assisted migration, broken into these 3 subcategories, are active management practices that move trees from where they are to where they could go. Extension and other organizations use modeling techniques to make hypotheses of future climates and projected ranges of tree species. So assisted population migration, this is the first box, is bolstering the quantities and genetic diversity of species within their historic range. That could be like planting bur oak seedlings from southern Minnesota or northern Iowa in central Minnesota. So it's still where bur oak is, but we're just moving around within that range. Assisted range expansion is fast tracking where a tree might have walked on its own given enough time. This would be like my research on eastern hemlock, which is currently only found in the Duluth area, and then planting it in Grand Rapids. So it's just a little bit further past. Assisted species migration is the most intensive practice, and it involves superseding the natural boundaries that a species could face, like a massive river, incongruent climate patterns, or a really strong habitat edge. An example of that would be planting northern pecan or pawpaws, whose ranges currently end in southern Iowa, here in southern Minnesota. Assisted migration is intentional, but there have definitely been some accidental migrations also. So thinking again about why we maybe don't want to plant things from Georgia here, they might not do well, but we could also introduce things that we don't want to be here. An example of that is white pine blister rust. And that was a consequence of importing infected nursery stock from Europe because the American nurseries just weren't competitive in the marketplace. So all of this to say, we need more trees and we're probably going to have to move them ourselves. And we want not just to be efficient, but for these trees to be healthy. So the, excuse me, I am a part of CSPN, which is the Climate Smart Seedling Production Network. And a cool part of this network is collaborating with small farmers here in Minnesota to diversify their crops by planting trees and working with researchers at University of Minnesota Duluth who are working on assisted migration. And so we're taking all of these concepts and turning it into a cool new model for getting trees in the ground. So here's a look at CSPN's current focus, shifting these now 6 species. I forgot to add silver maple onto this list from zones 5 through 9 and a little bit of 11 near the Minnesota River Valley north. So the Ederson lab at UMD will process the seed and track their provenance while farmers trained by the Sustainable Farming Association will grow them. And then the seedlings are ready to find their forever homes. If you're interested in any part of CSPN, there is a Z link. It's z.umn.edu/CSPN interest. If Drew wouldn't mind, I guess putting that in the Q&A for folks to see. And even though this project is focused on these areas, we intend for anybody who's interested, and specifically anybody who's interested in learning how to collect seed, to participate. I want to help you learn how to collect tree seeds. It doesn't matter if you live here, if you live somewhere else. We believe that a rising tide of collectors lifts all seeds off the ground. Okay, but in order to plant more trees, we need more seeds. And in order to have more seeds, we need a lot of help in a lot of different ways. So we do need more seed collectors, sure, but also folks who are out and about finding trees and collecting a lot of local climate data. Land managers intentionally managing stands or hosting collection events, and more growers and distributors. So as we go through this talk, I'd love you to think about where you might fit in. So folks have been collecting seed for the state since at least the 1930s. Unfortunately, it's really seasonal work, which makes sense, right? We see seeds generally in the fall, sometimes in the spring, but not all year. And we have yearly variations in yield, such as masting years for oaks. And that's not super conducive to a lucrative primary job. So the pool of collectors has dwindled as folks have aged out, and their skills or super secret spots haven't necessarily been passed on. I was hired under the assumption that seed collecting can be both a satisfying and potentially lucrative side hustle undertaken by people who love the outdoors and want to contribute to healthy, climate-adaptive ecosystems. The DNR and CSPN are paying for seed, and prices depend on the species, the demand. As we saw, the increased demand means increased prices, and the difficulty or size of collecting those seeds. So I'm not an economist, but I do know that seed collecting is an excellent opportunity to earn a couple bucks while spending some time in the woods. A park, your property, and maybe you help reduce a tripping hazard by getting some of those pesky black walnuts off the sidewalk. You do have to know a thing or two about seed in order to collect quality seed and then get paid for it. So you need to know what your target species is. Where and when do you start looking? How do you know if the seed you're collecting is even viable? What tools do you need? Is it a ladder, a tarp, a tennis ball picker-upper? Do you need to be able to climb for these species? No, but if you can climb, I'd also love to talk to you about that. And how does that type of seed affect the best practices for processing them or storing them? So in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and CSPN, I'm developing a training course appropriate for folks with various levels of collection experience. We'll cover tree identification, seed development, phenology, site selection, and obtaining permissions. We'll get to that too. Tools of the trade, and we'll have hands-on workshops led by more seasoned collectors. And beyond knowledge, there are some perks of this training. The Minnesota Association of County Land Commissioners is entertaining the idea of providing specific collection locations or waiving permit fees for certified collectors on county lands. And the Nature Conservancy is looking to hire 50 super collectors over the next 3 years, which means that they would pay for your time collecting and not just the quantity of seed that you've collected. So we have hosted a couple events in the past. We hosted 3 in September at Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve, St. John's University, and the Cloquet Forestry Center, where we had about 100 folks attend. The Forest Service geneticist Nick Labonte spent the morning teaching about seed development and viability testing, and seed collectors like Liv and Sid led outdoor skill building in the afternoon. We got a lot of really good feedback, including several suggestions to move some of the more information-dense sessions online. I think that makes a lot of sense. And when we launch the seed collection training this fall and then later this summer, it will be a flipped classroom style. So we'll have an online portion of the course and then an in-person at the end to help us anchor those skills. It's self-paced, so you can work at it. You've got a month to go through all of the content, which should be probably 5 hours or less of your time. And it's good for retirees, professionals, students, or wherever you are on your tree collection journey. And it's modular, so you can build your own adventure. If you don't need help identifying yellow birch, you can skip that video. If you're only interested in northern red oak, you can kind of follow that path all the way down. The first round of this training course, which is also conveniently named ACORNS, makes it really easy to find, is launching in May with a metro area cohort. And the registration website just went live. So again, this is for the metro, not because we don't care about anybody else, just because this is a group that's going to help me really smooth out those edges. And this is where I am located, which helps me find sites for us to go seed collecting at the end. And if you're not in the metro and maybe you're feeling a little put out that you have to wait until July, be heartened. They're the guinea pigs. Your experience will be hopefully even smoother. However, Twin Cities friends, don't let that stop you. Please help me make this the best course it can be. Because I'm not Minnesotan, I can handle all of your opinions and I want them desperately. My overarching goal is that this course is practical. You'll leave having learned some context, touched some seeds, and having developed a reasonable plan to follow. And I'm also hoping to incorporate a little bit of data collection, which we'll talk about now. A really important part of collecting seed is knowing where and when to find trees with seeds. Scouting encompasses the finding out part. Where are the target species even present? And then, are they developing seed? You can see in this picture, this is live oak on the third photo. You see just the tiniest little baby acorn starting to peek out. So paying attention to the seed development process is really helpful. Phenology and phenophases can vary not only species to species, but regionally. We know that southeastern Minnesota greens up sooner than the Northwest, and seed ripeness therefore varies also. And there's some predictability, but we need more data, and we don't need to train any more robots. Passive or active noticing is great, whether you drink coffee outside and see the oaks flowering, or sneeze because the oaks were flowering, or you walk in the woods and you might get hit by an acorn. It's all data if you write it down. Nature's Notebook is a really cool site where you can track your favorite trees and help us gather enough data to create a state-specific collection guide. Right now, we're using the Ontario Seed Guide. And there's a new, as of yesterday, a local phenology program called Minnesota Seed Scouting that you can contribute to. And land management. All of this seed needs to be collected from somewhere. And while there are many places from which folks can collect, there are also many which we can't. And as a collector, it's important to know what's allowed before you start collecting. And as a land manager or owner, you should also know what you're comfortable with or what your policy dictates. So my first question for you is, do you have a policy? I interviewed 12 county land commissioners and several said no one ever asked them, so they didn't have a policy. But with this goal from CSPN to develop groups of seed collectors across the state, ready or not, we're coming. And we hope to have places to collect. Developing guidelines and communicating them clearly will help everybody involved. Consider having that information easily searchable on your website or in signage on parkland. And if you're open to collection, that's great. But what do you need from seed collectors? Do you need a call just to give a heads up? Do you need a permit? Does that permit have a fee? If you want collectors to go through a training like ACORNS, cool. That's fine. Let them know, and then they can come find me. And maybe you want only professional collectors to come through. That's also fine. Let me know and I can connect you. As mentioned, some land is unavailable for seed collection due to rules you didn't make and can't change. And there may be other ways that you can come into the process, like hosting volunteers to collect phenological data, hosting seed collection trainings, or serving as an instructor. There's also the specific management side of things. Think about what trees you or other folks might want to collect from. They should be wild and plentiful, so we've got good genetic stock. Because planted trees have unknown provenance. If they do seed, great, that means they're not sterile, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that they are adapted to the local climate, therefore they're not as useful for assisted migration work. If you do have land that's open for collection, you can take a couple extra steps and steward your managed lands for seed. And there are many ways to do that, including selecting for a particular species. Maybe you hear this presentation and decide that you want to be my best friend and develop some land as a seed production area. You might prioritize a species or two, remove poor and sickly stock, which improves stand genetics, and also leaves plenty of growing space available for healthy trees to grow and makes it easier to collect seed. These stands look more like a park and are fabulous for both a stroll and prolific acorn collection. To be clear, there are many ways to manage land that can still function for seed collection, but there's some difference in terms of the effort you put in and the effort to collect, and maybe most importantly, the ability to become my best friend. So another thing that I want both managers and collectors to think about is safety. Seed collection can vary in risk depending on the species. Picking up acorns off the ground versus climbing ladders or trees to collect cones or birch catkins are just different in their levels of risk. Managers should consider safety for collectors. Are there hazards that you can remove, like widowmakers, or can you manage against thorny things? Are you communicating hunting activity? Collectors also have a general responsibility to themselves and their safety and should be watching out for hazards and understand both their physical and skill limitations. And managers can facilitate their safe participation, knowing that the seed that collectors collect might come right back to you. Also consider the social safety of collectors. Minnesota has a great diversity of outdoors people, and yet real and perceived safety is still unequal. One way to confer some protection is to provide some signal that people are allowed to be on your land and collecting. So one example, I had to park my massive research van on the Sioux Line Trail, it's an ATV trail. Generally speaking, vehicles should not be there. So I got a lot of curious looks and people who would stop to ask, why am I there? And I was really lucky that folks were mostly friendly. I was never alone, and I was usually with all white people. But that isn't always the case, and frankly, it shouldn't have to be. In order to keep my crew safe, I worked with the land manager, in this case, it was Mark Westfall, the county land commissioner, to mitigate the risk of confrontation. I had a copy of my permit on the dashboard of my vehicle and maintained an open line of communication give or take some connectivity issues with Mark. And one more safety thing to consider is safety from collectors. So we also are managing the land for the benefit of the land. If there are threatened species on your land, communicate or block off that area, revoke permission seasonally, whatever you need to do to keep that land secure. If the soil is easily compactable, consider restricting group size or not allowing ATVs. It is okay to selectively grant access rather than give blanket permissions. And I know I sound like a broken record and maybe even an extrovert, which I am, but it all really comes down to communication. So seed collection is a massive undertaking, but as with all things, many hands make manageable work. Not everyone has to do everything, and I shared a couple main ways to get involved with the seed collecting process. Attend a training, collect for CSPN or the DNR, help teach or host collection trainings and events. We'll hopefully be doing shadowing opportunities, gather data on regional, seasonal trends and seed presence and development, and buy seedlings. Vote with your dollars, for better and for worse. Markets matter. So whether you're a land manager, policy queen, scout, grower, collector, or planter, please find a way to plug in. All right. Thank you for listening. I talked a little really fast, but I love answering questions, and I figure we'll have quite a few of them, so I've left plenty of time for that. You can register for the class if you're in the metro area at the Z link below. Again, that is z.umn.edu/acorns1, or you can search for it on the extension courses and events page. I am happy to chat about seed collection, the upcoming trainings, or any other questions you might have. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Kira. Let's leave your slides up in case you have to go back to some of your slides, please.
Okay.
And let's see, Drew, do you want to start with the questions? I know we have a lot of responses of where the landowners are and different things, but yeah, do you want to start with the first one?
Yes. The first question, what's the best size time to plant an oak?
That is a great question, and I'm going to give you half an answer. So from a seed perspective, because I think I saw at least some curiosity about planting from seed, white oak seed will start germinating immediately as soon as it falls in the fall, whereas red oak species will overwinter and then start germinating in the spring. So that could be a possibility of why you are or aren't seeing something. As for when you plant a potted tree, I'm going to say go with the best recommendations of the internet. I believe it's spring or fall, and it depends on moisture, and it depends on how much effort you want to put into helping it succeed the first year or two.
And we have another question on oak trees. I have an oak tree in my yard that are old and probably infected. I have tried to grow transplant oak trees and have been unsuccessful. I want to learn how to grow oaks.
So again, this course isn't necessarily how to grow them, though they're excellent resources. That was the word I was looking for on the urban forestry. So U4 Lab, UFOR, at the University of Minnesota for more residential plantings or kind of individual plantings, and then some recommendations. I don't know if they're on extension or the broader internet for more forestry plantings. Also, it depends on what your tree is infected with. If you want to plant in the same space as where that infected tree is, or if it's time for removal. And not being able to see your tree and not being an oak disease expert, I can't really answer that, but if you send one of us an email, we can connect you with someone who is.
And yet another oak question. This one is landowner, 53 acres, north central Minnesota. We have a good regeneration. I question is how far apart should red oak be spaced, and At what age should they be removed?
Mm, All of these are very personal questions. And by what I mean by that is it depends on what you want your land to be used for. If you are growing it for timber production, that's going to be a different answer than if you're growing it for seed production, than if you're growing it for shade. So it feels like a cop-out. I'm going to say send us an email and we can try and connect you with someone who's going to have better answers.
And I believe you already answered this one, but are there any available details on upcoming seed collection workshops?
Yeah. So the very first seed collection workshop will be offered. The online portion will be open the entire month of May. So registration opens officially April 4th. Though, again, that sneaky link right there, you're the first people who get to hear about it. It's now open. It will be capped at about 50 people, and that's so that we can get really good feedback and refine. This is the first time it's been offered online and the second time it's been offered kind of ever here, with 4 options, but you only have to attend one, in-person workshops the first week of June. So you do the online portion, which you have a month, so you've got a lot of time to go through the material, ask good questions, make your collection plan, and then an in-person workshop to work on practicing seed scouting, cut tests for viability, try out some tools, ask more questions, and then that is the full course. At that point, it's unofficially a certification. It is not, it's an internal certification is what I'll say. You will get a little thing that says, I went through the course, but it is not at the same level as the FGCA, which is the Forest Genetic Conservation Association outside of Ontario or in Ontario.
And then we have a related question. Is there a minimum age for training participants? Specifically teenagers, I believe they're interested in.
I don't think so. And I think that this content is accessible for a whole wide variety of ages. I think teenagers will understand it. I don't think that there are specific extension policies on age. If they're under 18, I'm sure there's a parent guardian thing, but otherwise, yeah, bring your kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, etc.
Is there a list of which tree seeds are most needed for Minnesota and Wisconsin?
Sure. There are a lot of groups that are currently growing seed. The most public and accessible one is the DNR. So if you Google DNR seed and cone collection, that is where the screenshot that said, we need jack pine and black spruce and we'll pay you for it extra. So that's the best site there. I am not as familiar with Wisconsin, but I would assume it would be pretty similar. And then the 6 species that C-SPAN is focusing on are northern red oak, bur oak, swamp white oak, yellow birch, black walnut, and silver maple. So those are the 6 that we're collecting, though I know that there are a couple more that they're also collecting on, but these are the 6 we're focusing on for right now.
Which that is a perfect ending because the next question is, how and why did you select these 6 species?
These species were selected by, I believe, the Dr. Julie Ederson's lab in at UMD for their climate resilience. So these are species that are in southern and central Minnesota, that there's good data that suggests they'll do well in northern Minnesota. There's demand for them. They have value, whether that's ecosystem services or potentially some lumber, but generally this is reforestation planting. So we are looking for trees that we're going to plant and then leave there and let them do their thing.
Why do you believe hemlock would grow west of current range?
Sure. That's a great question. And part of it is because we've noticed that it's growing where it isn't native all over the state. So the first half of my research was sending out that survey asking, hey, have you seen hemlock? Did you plant it? Is it wild? What do you know? And we found that people were planting from Beltrami County with success all the way down to Winona County. And again, if we're taking this is the current and native range to being around Duluth, though we have historical accounts of the Paporis stand, which was in Itasca County. So we have some historical evidence that there used to be hemlock there before fire. They are not fire resistant or resilient at all. And due to both natural and human caused disturbance, they are no longer there. So still kind of in the native range, but not necessarily the current range, if that makes sense. But it does appear to be a species that will grow where it's planted.
And the next question is, I would like to have more information regarding tree migration networks, contact info, etc. I'm assuming if they sign up for that email list, that would cover that.
That's one place they can get it. There's also a lot of really good work happening in the Forest Service on the Chippewa National Forest. They've got a really incredible assisted migration plan. Carrie Pike offers information. She does webinars about assisted migration. And then this is not quite related, but if folks are interested in other seed production areas, seed and tree improvement, the Minnesota Seed and Tree Improvement Cooperative is starting to kick off in a couple of weeks. It's taken a couple year hiatus, but folks interested on the genetics side, rejoice. There's more information coming soon.
And the next question is, since my farm nursery is on the Wisconsin side of the St. Croix River, is there another group organized in Wisconsin, or can I join up with the CSPIN group in Minnesota?
Yeah. I believe there's some interest from CSPIN in collecting some Wisconsin seed because there's some federal funding involved. That part where trees don't know state borders, but federal funding does. So there might be a little bit of complication there. But either signing up for that CSPIN interest group or emailing CSPIN or emailing me, would love to get in touch with you. There's another group, Wild Rivers Conservancy, that does work in both Wisconsin and Minnesota, and they may have opportunities for you there.
Is there any risk of oak wilt transmission with collecting seeds from one region and moving it to another?
As far as I'm aware, no. Oak wilt is transferred mostly root to root and from beetles and spores, and that is happening in the trunk and bark. I have so many people that I'm like, ask this person that. I feel pretty confident in that answer. And there might still be some concerns. So my answer is it's probably fine. Shoot me an email.
And the next question is, red oak acorns that I have collected in Rice County have germinated but then die a year later. Is this perhaps from oak wilt?
Without more context, I'm not 100% sure. It also depends, when did you plant them and what care did you give them afterwards? So if it was recently, we've had a lot of drought conditions or really, really wet conditions and then drought conditions. So it could also be a climate issue and not just an oak wilt issue.
And then our next question is, you listed black walnut as a species you target moving north. There's already examples of black walnut growing in northern Itasca County, which is true. I have one outside my office.
Mm-hmm. that was the question?
Yeah.
So black walnut is native to below the river valley, and humans have been moving it north since it at least settlement, but potentially indigenous peoples have been moving it too. What I was reading is that European settlers said, "Hey, this wood is fantastic, and I'm gonna take it with me. I'm gonna grow my resources where I'm moving." So species, or no, this species has naturalized north, but it is not technically speaking native. So it is that assisted range expansion. And so the middle panel of those three assisted migration illustrations. Um, but it's not just that we are moving those species from where they are to where they aren't. It is that we are taking these genetics. So southern Minnesota is warmer and northern Minnesota is going to get warmer. So we are taking these genetics that are adapted and we're just moving them again where the species already exists, but we're diversifying those genetics. Thank you for asking that.
My question is, what about butternut? It seems to be a somewhat more northern tree, isn't it?
I'm not as familiar with butternut. And I know that with a lot of participatory science pushback, there have been restrictions that have been removed or softened, excuse me, um, that previously would have prevented movement. But I also know that there's butternut canker, and so it might also just be that the researcher said, this is a really cool species. Eventually, we'd like to see it moved. But that's not a species we're going to focus on. It doesn't mean that they never will or that someone else isn't interested. But just at this point, C-SPAN's pretty new and we're focusing on these 6 species.
And we have, you mentioned pawpaw earlier. I have a few on my land. I planted them from seeds that came from Iowa and Wisconsin. Are there any studies, programs I can connect with of other folks growing pawpaw?
That sounds like a Gary question. I don't know
You
if
know,
he's
you,
there you go.
right. We are trying to collect that information. But yes, I planted pawpaws in southern Minnesota as well. But I know there's many people in the Twin Cities that have pawpaws that are producing. So, yeah, maybe we should get a collection club or a pawpaw club fan club started in Minnesota. But yeah, try those southern varieties as long as they're not invasive or not on the noxious weed list. Plant what you want to plant and see if it'll grow. Don't plant 100 of them, but maybe plant a couple of them just to see if they'll grow in your landscape. Email me if you want to start the club on pawpaws.
Uh, the next question is, what is the state of state-run public nurseries and private tree nurseries regarding shortages of seeds, trees, and assisted migration?
Sure. I was listening to a presentation about how I'm calling it Stickum, the Seed and Tree Improvement Cooperative of Minnesota, is returning. And part of that discussion was, why is this work necessary? So, uh, right now, the state nurseries are few. Really, it's Badura and Willow. There's one in Willow that's also General Andrews is being brought back to life with the hiring of Nicole Schaefer. So she is the seed procurement specialist at the DNR. She started in October, I believe. Um, and there are some private nurseries, not very many. So in the I want to say the 20s and beyond into the 90s, um, with the increased value of agricultural products, so corn ethanol, a lot of those seed nurseries were converted to ag land. And so we lost some there. There was also um, a push from private nurseries to reduce state competition. And so that also caused some closing of public nurseries. Um, and and now we have very few. I don't remember exactly the number, But that's part of the problem is that, uh, and I am not a DNR employee, so it's not my goal to speak for them. But right now, they are mostly they are unable to reach all of their needs themselves, which is why they're relying on volunteers. I don't know where private nurseries are necessarily getting their stock. They may have collectors, they may outsource to PRT. And I know that's what some of the county land commissioners I talk to do. They might collect seed and give it to PRT, who grows it in Canada and brings it back. Or they might, again, just contract out and say, I don't know where you're getting your trees, but I need so many hundreds or so many thousands and give me what you got. And it's kind of across your fingers. I hope that it's well enough adapted to my area to grow well.
And next, somebody made a statement, and then I'm gonna read a question from somebody else that has to do with the topic. Uh, we've transplanted many year-old bur oaks. They are surviving after months, is the statement. And then the question is, I seem to have a bur oak nursery in my yard. Do some trees have a better germination rate than others?
Ooh, yes. Um, we'll go back to my hemlock example because I've spent years befriending the species. And while they might have cones 2 out of every 3 years, maybe, and they produce a whole lot of cones, half or often less of the seed inside of those cones is viable, and the ones that germinate are a fraction of that. So you might have a really plentiful seed crop and not good germination. On the other hand, thinking of species like oaks, especially on those big mast years, I think we had one 2 years ago or so, where they're spitting hundreds or thousands of acorns all at the same time. They're flooding the system. The squirrels can't get them all, neener, neener. And then you have really good germination rates. And so thinking about how the seeds are, and so that's the physiology side of things. Acorns have a lot of energy packed inside. That's why we can eat them. That's why squirrels and deer like to eat them. They've got fat and carbohydrates, and that helps nourish the seed and helps it germinate and have that energy reserve. Whereas things like gymnosperms, those naked seeds, often conifers, they don't have those reserves. So they generally don't germinate as well.
Uh, another question is, we have family land in central western Wisconsin, but I live in Minnesota. Would seeds collected there be able to help the Minnesota DNR and the ACORNS program?
Hmm. You would have to ask the DNR. Generally, from what I understand, they want to keep seed near where it was collected. So it might be that the Wisconsin DNR could use that seed. CSPN could potentially use that seed. Again, you should ask them. And part of that is, even if the answer is yes, and you have to figure out how to get it into the right hands. So I want to say maybe.
And how long are seeds viable? And then they have dash maple oak.
Ooh. Um, Maple seeds depend. So I believe um, that I think it's silver maple, isn't viable very long because it's a spring um, dropper. It's not the word I'm looking for. So the goal is to hit the ground and start running. So that one is not viable super long, whereas, there are maples that seed in the fall and they are prepared to overwinter. You can see they've got the Samara starts browning and drying, and it's got a harder, I guess, nut right there with the wing. Oaks depends. So again, the white oak family, so it's white swamp, white bur, left on their own, all acorns. Well, excuse me. When they fall, you have a really small window before the bugs get them, the squirrels get them, or they start germinating, or they dry out. They do not last very long on the ground. However, if you pick them basically right after they fall and you store them, you keep them a little bit moist but not moldy and cool, then you've got time. I probably wouldn't keep them more than, over winter to plant for the next spring. And red oaks, you might have a little bit longer, but again, the goal is to get them moving pretty fast. But seeds like black walnut have a much longer shelf life, I guess. You still want to keep, if you're keeping them very long term, you keep them cool, but inside of that really hard shell, they're good for a while. You can leave them on the ground. They've got a much larger collection window than something like acorns or maples.
Would you speak a little bit about your hemlock research?
I only have 7 minutes. So the really, really quick of it is my research had two parts. The first is where are hemlock growing right now? Where have they been planted or where are they wild? And what does that tell us about where they can grow? And so as I alluded to, there are a lot of hemlock that have been mostly planted here in the state. If you picture Minnesota as roughly a rectangle, and then take this diagonal up, there we go. All in there is where they're growing. And they seem to be kind of non-discriminate as long as they get water and aren't left to their own devices in the winter. And they are evergreens, but they're really prone to desiccating, so they want to be wet. Shade is great. Wind breaks are great. And then the second part is how can we grow them better? So I had some planting trials. They are this year in their third year, so we're still learning a whole lot, but the more local we can get them, that being Wisconsin and Minnesota, perform better than trees that we got from Pennsylvania. And again, keeping them moist under planting is great. Planting them in full sun, less great. Though we can use down dead wood as partial help cover to keep them safe. So that's the quick of it.
I'm curious about the collection itself. How do you collect large quantities of seeds? For example, raking up the ground using a net in the tree?
Yeah, tarps are your friend. So if you do have a more open space, think of it like a park. If it's your land, then you can just leave the tarp there and let things fall into it. If you don't have that kind of time, I mean, bring a tarp anyway or a bucket, but absolutely, if the ground is flat and like mostly mowed, you can rake it into a bucket. You can use, it's like a black walnutator 5,000. I can't remember what it was. Gary sent me a link, but it's basically a tennis ball picker-upper or like if you can imagine a bingo spinner, it'll just collect it. The best way though is to find a tree that's really going to town, making sure that at least 60% of those seeds are viable using a cut test. And if you go where there's a lot of seed, you'll get a lot of seed.
And how does germinating pine cone seeds differ from germinating acorns? Do you separate every seed from the cones?
Sure. I don't do a lot of work with cones yet, but what I do know is that when cones are collected, so the DNR, they want closed cones, so those seeds are still inside. The cone can be potentially still like a little green, not fully, but still mostly ripe. And what they will do then is slowly heat them, so that will open. Oh my goodness. It is Friday morning, and apologies for my brain. The scales, the seed will come out and they will sift it out. And so they have just these itty bitty flaky seeds. And then they plant a whole bunch and hope that they grow.
Kira and Drew, I think we're going to have to close the webinar today, but wonderful, what an excellent presentation you did on acorns today and seed collection and nut collection. So for those of you that didn't get your questions answered, please email Kira or myself and our forestry team, and we'll get back to you with the best answers we can. And obviously, there are some growing oak questions that we probably don't have a great website for, but certainly you can email us about some of those oak questions. On the oak wilt side of it, red oak is more susceptible than white oak species. So certainly, if you're looking at species of oaks, maybe a white oak version of oak species that are out there would be better than red oak if you're in the oak wilt zone of the state. Kara, again, thank you very much. And Emily and Drew, thank you for managing the webinars, the questions and so forth. We are going to have another series of Fridays with the Forester in April. April 11th will be our next one, local service providers for woodland owners. As you leave today's webinar, you'll be asked a few questions for evaluation. You stay anonymous. We'd like your comments on today's webinar and then maybe future ones that you'd like to see. Also, if you want to be a part of our newsletter, yeah, we have a My Minnesota Woods newsletter. If you're not a part of that, there's a Z link there. And then all of our recordings for Fridays with the Forester are recorded at our Z link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. And that's our YouTube website. Thank you again, Kara and Drew and Emily. Wonderful presentation, Kara. And do participate in our trainings. Kara's training is coming up this summer, online trainings and then actually field trainings as well. Thank you for attending today's Fridays with the Forester.